Let's go. You lead the way. Where are we headed? Towards a net zero future, of course. Cleaner water, more electricity, a sustainable society. That's the destination we've set ourselves. This we know. Yes, we know exactly where we're going, but we need to get there quicker. So, let's build on the progress we've already made by working and walking together. With the right partners, tools and ideas, we'll become an unstoppable force. This we know. Right now, there are businesses who are putting technology and sustainability at the heart of everything they do. Brave leaders turning maybes into realities and building something better for everyone. Now is the time to look to the future and reinvent ourselves today, empowering others to do the same tomorrow. Yes, we know what the future holds, and we know how to get there. So, let's take charge of the journey today.
So, good afternoon here in Glasgow at COP26, and welcome to all of you on behalf of Accenture. We've got a wonderful group of speakers. We've also got a wonderful group of folks in the room, but more importantly, I understand we have more than 2,000 people joining us digitally, and we will be putting on the recording for others to be able to watch in the future as well. From Accenture's Global Management Committee and Executive Board, of which I'm a member, it's a pleasure to be hosting this session, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to hear from some inspiring CEOs that are making a huge difference. We will be discussing climate action in the travel and tourism sector, and for this I'm joined by esteemed colleagues from the World Travel and Tourism Council and the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP. So a warm welcome to those as well as guests. And since March 2020, members of my team, of our Accenture team, have been seconded to support the work of the high-level climate action champions, Gonzalo Munoz and Nigel Topping. And it's been a privilege to be able to help them with their work. This team has been appointed by the UNFCCC and the COP presidency to drive business and other non-state actor ambitions in the run-up to COP26. And the main campaign arm of this work is the Race to Zero. This UN-backed global campaign calls on the global economy to take rigorous and immediate action to halve global emissions by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2050 as soon as possible. The goal is to deliver a healthier, fairer, and more resilient low-carbon world. Accenture ourselves is proud as an organisation to be part of the Race to Zero. When I took on my role at Accenture, Julie, our CEO, my boss, and I made the decision that we had to be our own best example if we wanted to be able to credibly deliver services and to integrate sustainability and things like net zero into our own actions. And so we signed up to a science-based target of 1.5 degrees by 2025 net zero, and to include, on top of that, the origination of our own sets of offsets to ensure the credibility and the additionality of those projects, but also the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Initiative that some of you will have just recently seen, the Cleaner Skies for Tomorrow initiative, because I think, and this is relevant to today's conversation, I think the answer is not for us to suddenly disconnect the world globally from travel and from tourism, or even from business and interactions of different economies and cultures. We need to find solutions and ways to manage our way out of that, and we are committed to that as an organisation. We aim to be a business that incorporates sustainability practice in all of our operations, and we've made good progress on our own decarbonisation journey, so with reductions of nearly 40% in our Scope 1 and 2 emissions and a 45% decrease in our emissions per unit of revenue. As of September the 1st, we're 50% renewable. We've signed up to Renewable Energy 100, and we'll be 100% by 2023 in terms of our renewables commitment on that journey. Now, I think traditionally the consulting industry has, of course, been no stranger to travel, and certainly one of the largest customers, if not the largest customers by way of sector of aviation in terms of commercial aviation and also in terms of business travel and in terms of hotels. So we ourselves believe that we need to think incredibly carefully about how we decouple our own growth from that intensity of footprint. You know, it's not that we don't want to travel, but we don't want the emissions and we don't want the damage to the planet as a sector. And Accenture, as the world's largest technology and consulting services firm, has an enormous stake in the game with you all on this. And we must find ways and means to combat some of the challenges that we find, or we will simply find ourselves in a world where we aren't able to connect. And I think that's a huge shame and a huge danger, and I think actually puts at risk some of the extraordinary benefits of globalization that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years, of which travel and tourism have been an incredibly important part. So all actors connected in a value chain play a role in affecting systemic change, and so it's encouraging to welcome the likes of Accor, Melia, IHG and Intrepid into the race to zero. And these leaders, alongside 4,000 other companies across the real economy, are setting the high bar that the travel and tourism sector needs, and we hope to see many more in the race soon. To build that future and to help light the way, Accenture has been working with the WTTC and UNEP to develop the roadmap that supports the decarbonisation of the sector. And what I would finish by saying is we hosted yesterday a wonderful set of sessions that I think are incredibly important as a final remark before I hand over, which is that we focused not just on the economics and the science and the data, which I think are incredibly important, and that's certainly what drives Accenture towards delivering the SDGs through our own activities, but also through our services and delivering net zero. But also I think sometimes we forget the joy and the cultural aspect and the behavioural aspect, and you can see things like the art sculpture that we brought here, kintsugi, a Japanese art form that builds back better, more strongly, more beautifully. That if you haven't had a chance, have a look. And we had last night a sustainable wine industry session where we had some of the world's most sustainable wine producers and hoteliers and people putting in place really just phenomenal effort in things like food and hospitality, and trying to bring sustainability to that in terms of adaptation, mitigation and influencing people. And I think the travel and tourism opportunity is to actually also to be on the front foot about the incredible role it could play, I think, in actually finding sustainable ways for people to celebrate and enjoy travel again without that sense that they're doing damage. So I do think that, as we had yesterday, I think there's just a huge opportunity for us to move from a defensive to a front foot position. And in line with that, we're excited to bring you this story today. To share more of it, I'll now hand it over to Julia, who's the CEO of the WTTC, and who's going to start, I believe, with a short video as she enters the stage, or at least I hope she is, if our technology works.
Climate change represents one of the greatest global challenges of our time. The potential impacts are devastating beyond repair, and the effects are far-reaching to every country, every community, every sector, business and individual.
Together, as the travel and tourism community, we must drive actions to address the climate crisis.
We must commit to ensuring that our sector's future growth is sustainable.
We must join others in a path that honors the aspiration of net zero emissions by 2050.
And we must embrace these goals with the passion, care, and active engagement our sector has proven to have in abundance.
Travel and tourism has the opportunity to become an example of positive change and the catalyst to inspire others.
So as our industry rebuilds, let us focus on ensuring we build back even better. Better for our planet and better for the people and the communities within it.
The recent pandemic has not only put a much-needed spotlight on the environmental issues our global society faces, but shown our industry that the only way to overcome a crisis is through collaboration.
So, as we progress towards the Paris 1.5-degree targets, we must do it together.
All corners of our industry have a vital role to play, from accommodation, aviation, and cruise to travel agencies and tour operators.
Together, we can work to make our world a better place and ensure a more sustainable future for generations to come.
Lovely. Thank you for your very warm welcome, Peter. I'm Julia Simpson, as you can see, President and CEO of WTTC, and I'm thrilled that we're here together today and joined by 2,000 people joining us virtually to talk about climate change and the important role that travel and tourism plays in fighting it. The WTTC is a membership organisation with over 200 top CEOs from around the world, helping to highlight the potential and value of travel and tourism. Our main focus is sustainable growth. We support our members in their sustainability efforts, including mitigation and adaptation to climate change and how they can build resilience for a sustainable future. This is our planet, and we have the responsibility and honour to care for it. But we can only do this if we work together, because we need change to happen now and at pace. And that's why WTTC has put climate change front and centre of its priorities. Our first step on this journey was taken in 2019 when WTTC became a proud signatory to the UNFCCC Climate Neutral Now initiative. At that time, the sector accounted for about 10.4% of global GDP. People often don't realise how critical our sector is and how large a proportion of global wealth it represents. And before the pandemic struck, I just wanted to highlight that 1 in 4 new jobs created in the world were created in travel and tourism. And the majority of those jobs were for women, and a majority of those women worked in poorer countries. So our industries that make up our broader sector include aviation, hotels, tour operators, travel agencies, cruise liners. But of course, the impact of COVID has been devastating for our sector. You all know the effect that it's had on everybody's ability to travel, and just as Peter was saying then. And we saw international arrivals decreasing by 74% in 2020, and we lost 62 million jobs globally. So while we were all focused on recovery from this crisis, the post-pandemic world provides an opportunity to build back better, as we said in the film, and redefine our measures of success and our approach to travel and tourism. COVID also highlighted, as we know, the long-known vital connection between nature and the health of our people and planet. We know the future of the sector will depend on our ability to rebuild more sustainably and resiliently. Our members and their communities are suffering from rising sea levels, deforestation, and the loss of natural habitat. It affects the planet, and it also affects the livelihoods of millions of people in some of the poorest countries. We must therefore ensure that our growth includes the protection of nature and biodiversity and contributes positively to those communities, their natural ecosystems, cultural heritage upon which their livelihoods depend. So, to this end, and to reiterate what Peter said, climate actions are integral to responsible recovery, and it's critical that travel and tourism companies make net zero commitments and create tangible action plans to accelerate their decarbonisation. We need to develop business models that incorporate alternative energy sources to power our infrastructure. And we need investments in technological solutions that help reduce and remove carbon from the atmosphere. Collaboration and support within and across different industries and along the value chains that lie at the core of all these activities is critical, because these collective challenges require collective action. We have enough proof now that companies can be competitive in a sustainable world, and we know our actions of today will define our world of tomorrow. So the responsibility is clear. To get there, it's important that we work with common definitions, and the commitments we make as businesses are science-based and aligned with aspirations of leading initiatives such as the UNFCCC's Race to Zero, the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action for Tourism, and the Saudi Sustainable Tourism Global Centre. Only through collaboration with the travel and tourism sector will we in the travel and tourism sector achieve net zero by 2050 in line with the Paris Agreement. Now, to guide organisations in achieving their targets and help those remaining to develop them, our team, together with Accenture and the United Nations Environment Programme, have collaborated to develop the first ever net zero roadmap for the whole of the travel and tourism sector. The roadmap includes key milestones and decarbonisation corridors for each travel and tourism industry, and it also sets out stretch targets for those who can go faster and further. I wanted just to say that faced with COVID, government stepped up to the tune of £8 trillion. That is the amount of money globally that's been invested so far by governments to save lives around the world. Well, now we are facing a global tragedy where many, many more could die or face extreme hardship and poverty. So I really think that $1 billion a year from developed nations is well within our capability to save the planet that we call home. I would like to thank all the organisations that were part of this collaborative process, including CLEAR, ATAG, UNFCCC, IATA, headed up by the indomitable Willie Walsh, Travelist, SHA, as well as the WTTC Sustainability Committee, led amazingly by Darryl Wade, and of course all our task force members. I also want to just say thank you to people that don't always get the praise, not the person standing here, but the people who've done the real work to deliver this. My wonderful team, Virginia, Chris and Burka, for their dedication, and to my former colleague who will be speaking shortly, Jonathon Counsell, who has really led the way with his dedication to aviation. We'd now like to share an introduction to the Net Zero Roadmap for travel and tourism.
Change represents one of the greatest challenges humankind has ever faced, and the travel and tourism sector has been a contributor, with its footprint recently estimated to be 8 to 11% of total global greenhouse gases. In partnership with the United Nations Environmental Programme and Accenture, WTTC's Net Zero Roadmap has been created to further support travel and tourism stakeholders on their vital journeys towards net zero emissions, focusing on specific industries within the sector and aiming to encourage businesses to further prioritise climate actions, setting high ambitions that will accelerate the change towards a better future for our planet and the people within it. The objectives of the roadmap are threefold. First, it aims to offer a better understanding of the status quo of climate actions by travel and tourism businesses. Of the 250 businesses analysed for the report, just over 40% have a climate target. And the variety present within aspects of those targets call for better transparency and comparability. Second, it provides clear guidance in the form of a decarbonisation corridor framework. A 3-tier net zero roadmap is introduced, leading to sectorial net zero emissions by 2050, and groups companies based on relative ease to lower greenhouse gas emission intensity, setting targets for market leaders as well as industry averages. Finally, it gives tangible guidance and recommendations on steps to help businesses turn ambition into action, and where governments must focus their support. A decarbonisation action framework provides a structured guide to get to net zero for different industries, including energy efficiency improvements, operational improvements, transitioning to lower carbon energy sources, fuels and technologies. Travel and tourism has been a key global driver of economic prosperity and employment opportunities for decades. The Net Zero Roadmap shows how it can be a key global driver for climate action and shows a sustainable future for our sector too.
Fantastic video. I think really, makes you want to travel and experience tourism again. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jesko Neuenburg, and I'm the Global Travel Sustainability Lead for Accenture, and wanted to give you a little bit more detail about the roadmap that we've been developing jointly with WTTC and UNEP. So the purpose of putting together the roadmap was basically fourfold. We wanted to provide an overview of the status quo of decarbonization of the travel and tourism sector. We wanted to introduce a new target corridor framework, and I will explain that in a little bit more detail. We wanted to provide guidance for decarbonization for businesses across the sector. And of course, we're also issuing a call for action, which is particularly pertinent during these 2 weeks of COP here in Glasgow. Some of the findings. We've seen that between 8 and 11% of global emissions are attributable to travel and tourism. That means that travel and tourism can play an important role in the global journey towards net zero. We've also seen that in terms of climate targets, of the 250 companies we looked at, only about 42% actually had set a climate target and publicly communicated that. And of the ones that had, only about 20% are in alignment with SBTi guidance. So clearly there's still work to be done on the target setting. We also heard about a number of key challenges from the participants that we spoke to, particularly around emissions measurement and reporting, and there again, specifically to Scope 3 emissions within the sector, about the fragmented regulatory landscape globally and the lack of government support in a lot of places, about the high dependency on infrastructure to help decarbonize the sector, whether it's power grids or refueling infrastructure at airports, and also about insufficient internal and external funding that's needed for the transition. To account for the diversity that we saw in terms of starting points, but also in terms of the pathway to decarbonization, we developed this new target corridor framework. And we have 3 corridors, where the first one is for easy to abate activities within travel and tourism. And the second one is for harder to abate activities, which would include accommodation and in-destination activities. The third one is about hard-to-abate activities such as aviation and cruise. And for each corridor, we're showing a pathway for the industry average, as well as a pathway for the industry leaders. And we've validated these corridors through the conversations that we've had with over 60 businesses from the different industries that we spoke to. We've also done a rigorous peer review with a number of organizations that Julia highlighted earlier. We've looked at some of the guidance from bodies like SBTi, IATA, CLIA, but we also looked at the individual targets that companies have set themselves and some of the leaders and where they're basically putting their ambition. And so while we think these corridors are indeed ambitious, we also think they are needed and they are very much achievable. And if we follow the logic of those corridors, we've also looked at what the absolute emissions of the sector would do. And after recovering post-COVID, we would see that the emissions would actually peak already in 2023, would then gradually decline until 2035, and would finally more rapidly decline to reach net zero by 2050. All this while we would still see growth in the sector of between 3 and 5%, depending on industry. However, important to note is that this is very sensitive to the rate of decarbonization that we would see. And therefore, it's very important that all the players work together to really drive the decarbonization as quickly as we can. The final part of the roadmap looks at a decarbonization action framework. And that framework has 15 building blocks that companies can use as guidance to develop their own net zero roadmaps. And it includes things like setting a carbon inventory, measuring the materiality of climate risks, setting the right climate targets and corresponding net zero strategy, how to get leadership involved, building the right capacities internally, getting budgeting and financing lined up, and having the right governance in place, and then working on a portfolio of initiatives to reduce carbon emissions as well as compensate any residual emissions, and working with partners across their supply chains to do so, as well as with stakeholders from governments to employees to investors, and finally putting in place the right monitoring and reporting framework that measures the progress as they go. I will conclude with our call to action, which has 5 parts for businesses to set the right baselines and emissions targets, and doing that now, to monitor and report on their progress regularly, to collaborate within and across industries, because this journey can only be successful if we do it together, not if we go it alone, to provide financing and funding for the transition, and finally, to raise awareness and build capacities on climate change within their organizations. With that, I'd like to invite Jeremy Smith up on stage. Jeremy is the co-founder of Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency and will lead us through our panel today. Jeremy, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just introduce myself quickly for a little bit of you who don't know who I am. As Jessica said, I'm Jeremy Smith, co-founder of Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency, and for the last 2 years, we have been very much working to achieve much of what was on that last slide, to bring together the industry around a set of shared targets, around consensus and collaboration, and to agree that we had to base our response in science. I'm going to invite 2 people up here, and we'll have 2 people joining us, and we will discuss exactly how we turn a call to action into action, because in the end, if we've got a decade in which to reduce climate emissions in half, and it's taken us 2 years to get here, we definitely need to accelerate action. So I'd like to start with asking WTTC's Vice Chair of Sustainability, Darrell Wade, to join me here, please. The CSO of IAG, Jonathon Counsell. And then, because it's not a manel, the CSO of Iberostar, Gloria Fluxa, will be joining us over here. And the MD of Global Business Development for Travel at Google, Gianni Marostica. Thank you. Darrell, if I could start with you. We've known each other.
Jeremy, you've told us we're being very informal today. Stick to it, okay?
Well, you know no other way. So, Darrell, we've known each other a while. You speak truth to whoever is there to listen to it.
Not always wanted.
Not always wanted, always necessary. You've been involved, from the beginning of tourism's journey towards sustainability. We'll look at your own company's progress in a minute, but sitting here as we are now to talk about this roadmap, specifically the roadmap, how important is it that we get to this point here today?
Yeah, look, thanks, Jeremy, and I have been involved in for a fair while, and And I've got to say, it's particularly thrilling to be here today and to see this roadmap come to life. And it's really exciting because it's for the first time that our entire industry actually can see the pathway forward. And, it's a very disparate industry. An airline is not a hotel, is not a cruise line, is not a tour operator. Everyone is very different. And for the first time, we've got an approach across our whole industry using Accenture's methodology to actually see the future and understand the future. So, yeah, it's particularly exciting.
Excellent. But how much progress have we made to get to this point? And I've sort of hinted at it there.
Yeah.
We've made this progress to get to this point. We've brought us all together. We're all talking, but the talking doesn't address it.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And I guess that's, I think to be perfectly honest, the history of our industry hasn't been great on decarbonisation. We've been slow. And I think it was really only about 2 years ago when we had the New York Climate Week, when WTTC put a high-level ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050, that the wheels started to turn. And then I think it was a month or two after that you started Tourism Declares, which really galvanised, in the end, several hundred companies to create climate plans and declare their ambitions on climate. And so that's really got some momentum going, because up until then there was no collaboration across the industry at all. There was a few kind of small businesses doing great things, but there was no consensus of opinion. There was, to be frank, a lot of denial still. There was a lot of "it's too hard for us," or "we're too small, we make no impact anyway," and excuse making. And I think what we've seen, particularly over the last year or so, is the industry actually now acknowledging that we're a part of the world. And as we saw just then, between 8 and 11% of total CO2 emissions. That's an awful lot. And I think, a lot of the industry players are now saying, well, actually, not only do we have great responsibility in that to the world and to humanity or whatever, but the flip side of it is, if we really want to be honest about it, there's an existential crisis here. Of all industries in the world, the travel industry is the one that takes people from one place to another place. And so we absolutely rely on having healthy, vibrant destinations to travel to. Now, in a 3-degree world, which is where we're currently on the projection to get, there will be no destinations. The reefs will be bleached, the beaches might be underwater, many of the world's leading cities will have tides that we don't want to know about, snowfields will be gone. So we've got to change, otherwise the industry doesn't exist anymore. So, we're now, I think, really seeing that. When WTTC really got serious about this about 12 months ago, we put out a call of interest to members, and we're actually quite surprised ourselves by how many members wanted to get involved and see a solution that we're seeing today. And it wasn't there, so there's been a lot of collaboration since then.
Fantastic.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's a great long answer. You felt like you got some stuff off your chest. Net zero 2050, or as soon as possible before 2050, is the frame. That's what we're here for. The faster we start, the better we get there. And yet, one of the slides that Jessica shows we're going to be struggling as an industry to actually start reducing emissions in total over the course of the next decade. Tourism declares cut emissions in half by 2030 is the call. Well, what does it look like for our sector to be in the right place in 5 to 10 years' time?
Yeah, I think this roadmap shows it really well in terms of, there is the relatively easy to decarbonise right through to the difficult to abate sectors. And so I think we do have to be very conscious of the diversity of the industry. Realistically, it is much harder for the aviation industry and the cruise industry to decarbonise than it is to, say, for us as a tour operator. Having said that, net zero by 2050 is, of course, where we now all want to go, and there is broad consensus that that's where we're going to go. But as you rightly say, it's the interim targets probably that are most important. And if we can do serious heavy lifting by 2030 in particular, then that's really fantastic. So last when was it? Thursday, when we launched the Glasgow Declaration. that states not only the net zero by 2050, but also 50% by 2030. Already we've got several hundred members signing up to that, and that's seriously great because that early heavy lifting is sensational. I should say, by the way, that actually the first 50% of your emissions is actually the easy part. So to a certain extent, whilst 50% by 2030 might sound really ambitious, in fact, it's the next 50% which is going to be the really hard part. So making those early, strong steps is the way to go.
Okay, I'm going to ask, you're going to answer questions both as WTTC and I'm going to give you one as Intrepid. And then
well, just tell me which hat I've got on.
You've done WTTC and that was great.
Okay.
But you just alluded there to the 50% being the first 50 being the easier 50, and I'm guessing that comes from experience. And I wonder, from your experience with Intrepid, that for those who don't know, has been one of the sort of leading lights at a scale of a tourism company that has actively committed to sort of putting sustainability and social commitments at its heart. Where do you see, from your experiences, the opportunities for catalysing change?
Yeah, so thanks for reminding me how old I am. But we have indeed, we made a decision way back in 2006 to become carbon neutral, which we achieved by 2010, complete with the auditor's stamp to say that we had done that. And so, we've been involved in it for a long time, and the reality is it was pretty hard in those days because even just measuring your emissions was extremely tricky. Fortunately, that's got better, and there's a lot of tools out there now to measure emissions and track performance and so forth. And the WTTC's got a raft of tools. Tourism Declares has this roadmap in itself is an incredibly useful tool. So. What was the second part of your question?
It was just that, really. What are you doing to catalyse change?
Yeah, so I think really what we're doing, we're saying, okay, well, look, we've done what we've done. About a year ago, we decided that it was a little bit vague, some of our goals, so we adopted science-based targets fully. So that really gives you a level of rigour in the system, and I would encourage anyone who's seriously committing to decarbonisations to adopt science-based targets because it gives you a framework, it gives you basically an accounting standard to work to, which is fantastic. And then collaborate. I think it's, for too long we at Intrepid have been acting on our own. Now I'm just thrilled to see hundreds of companies and probably soon thousands of companies involved in decarbonisation. And I think for those that have perhaps done more work, like IAG, like Intrepid, we should be sharing our best practice with others so that we can really help the industry, because ultimately it is for all of industry's benefit and all of the world's benefit, obviously, but all of the industry to get this right. We've got a responsibility to get it right, so we've got to work together. And, we recently released a 36-page guide on decarbonisation for tour operators, kind of giving you a step-by-step guide on how to do that. Because we just figure that, if even, so-called competitors use that to help decarbonisation, then ultimately we're all better off. It doesn't matter. Let's just work together.
Thank you, Daryl. I will move on. I'm going to ask now to speak to the screen to Gloria Fluxa, the CSO of Iberostar. Hello there, Gloria.
Hello. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, brilliant. Hi there. Daryl was talking about both the science-based targets and the need to come together. And now, while Intrepid is the only tour operators I know at the moment with a science-based target, there's a lot of hotelier companies such as Iberostar who have been moving forward and certainly committing to net zero, sharing the various pieces of work. We've seen the methodology for net zero that Greenview has been publishing, or is about to publish, and has been releasing stuff on now. It seems that maybe the accommodation sector at its best is further forward than the other sizable sectors. I mean, speaking on behalf of Iberostar, where have you been investing time and energy in addressing emissions?
Yes, thank you. Again, pleasure to be here and be part of this traction towards a net zero. I think that what drives us all together, despite the differences that we have in the subsectors of travel and aviation, is the conviction that the roadmap to net zero is vital and is necessary for all of us. We're a family business that is very convinced and determined, and we have laid out a roadmap to become carbon neutral by 2030. And in order to do so, we are seeing that there's just certain focuses like reducing our total energy consumption. We have clear objectives. We use science, we use data, and we want to reduce our energy consumption at least by 35% by 2030. This will come from investments, but the main part from behavioral changes. People or departments like the maintenance departments of our resorts will become very important because they will need to understand and work together towards that neutrality. We've also been putting a lot of efforts towards electrification. Electrification is key to arriving to that neutrality. So we already have pilots here in Europe and in the Americas of kitchens that are electric. We have a new hotel, to give you an example, upcoming now in Aruba, that all the water, cooling and heating systems will be electric, and this will be a first one for 2022. And this will generate the trend of learning process of how important the electrification is and where we want to take it to. And I think a last but not least important pillar where we've been putting a lot of our efforts as well is the way we purchase energy in all our power purchasing agreements, right? We've incorporated a climate change manager that is really looking on the way on how we can better purchase energy and how we can better access to all renewable energy infrastructures. You were mentioning before that it is certainly a challenge in many destinations. There still needs to be a lot of development, but we're there. We're there to support it. We're there to generate the demand and be there to make that lead towards renewables as much as possible. And when they're not available, we're working towards the process of using REC contracts and guaranteeing that the energy consumption that we have is renewable. We're also aware that the last bit of emissions that will be remaining, we will need to compensate. So we have also made the commitment in our determination to compensate at least 75% of our emissions using nature-based solutions at the destinations where we operate by protecting and restoring nature in the destinations where we operate. Because we do feel that we also want to bring up the quality. We want to bring up the quality of the destinations where we operate. We want to involve our employees. We want to involve also the experience of our guests when they're at the destinations to see that certainly that is possible. And again, I will remain as well with the last comment of the necessary collective action, because it did come as a surprise to us that our scope 3 is at least 70%. So we need to work together towards this. This is not something that we can do in an individualistic manner. So the race to zero certainly needs to bring all of us together and guarantee that we take the roadmap together.
You sort of answered half the question I was going to ask you, which was about your scope 3 and your value chain. So I'd love to sort of go a little deeper on that. I mean, you talked about addressing the energy, addressing renewables, replacing where you can, doing all of that, and that clearly addresses a sizable part of the emissions from your hotels, from the properties. But what are you looking at when you say the scope of your emissions, the scope 3? Who are you involving in that? Where does it start? Where does it end?
We have embraced SBTi. So we are using SBTi to channelize and quantify our scope 1, 2, and 3, of course. And coming back to the comment on scope 3, what we're trying to do is work as something as important as our supply chains, because we won't be able to reach that neutrality and net zero if we don't involve our supply chains. We want all the products that we consume in our hotels to also be on the same track. So for that, we have incorporated talent that is necessary and that will support us on that path. And to give you a clear example, we have now incorporated in Iberostar hotels a circularity manager, that one of his first duties will be to work with our supply chain, for them to also understand the relevance of this, to be able for us to have choices in all the regions where we operate, and at the same time to support them to embrace this, right? To make their own SBTi commitments, to generate their own path forward. Because again, this is the only way we see that it is realistic for tourism to go. It is either a tourism that embraces this, that is responsible, that is regenerative, or it won't be the tourism of the future that we want.
And what does that support look like? I mean, you're talking about a host of different companies, I imagine, in your supply chain, some of some size and with capacity to understand and follow an SBTi process, but some who are small, who don't even have someone whose job is addressing sustainability. How do you support those?
I think it's a question of being very open and transparent. You have to be very open and transparent on what the efforts mean, how much that represents to you, to have a very open policy of communication, and to join them in their process of understanding, right? Bringing them to the right tracks of measurement. bringing them to embracing SBTI, as I was mentioning, and understanding, of course, why we're doing this as a business. And if they do understand it, they will feel more engaged and more motivated. And in the same time, if this traction is generated, you will also have case of examples of best practices that you can share. And that level of motivation would be just exponential. And this is the way we're doing it. We're prioritizing it with the suppliers that have the long withstanding relationships and support us for a long time. And with that, we take them hand in hand and use them as the first case examples.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We will come back to you later. I'm going to move on now to aviation and speak to Jonathon Counsell. So it's transparency, it's honesty. It's a pleasure for me because as someone who gives a great deal of keynote speeches, there's always going to be a hand in the room that sticks up and says, I'd like to ask you about the elephant in the room in aviation. So for once, I'm not going to be asked about it, but I'm going to have the chance to ask you about it, Jonathon.
Look forward to it.
The whole, your sector has agreed a net zero 2050 goal.
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. IAG has signed on to Race to Zero. But you're a hard-to-abate industry, and a lot of the challenge around that roadmap accelerating is to do with how we address aviation's challenges, and obviously we're talking primarily about fuel.
Absolutely.
But it's possible. I mean, a lot of the conversation is around future technologies, but there is also a conversation about things that exist now, just not at a necessary scale.
Yep. So, yeah, if I just sort of provide the overall context, I mean, the good news today is my life's been dominated by carbon roadmap since 2008 through Sustainable Aviation, where, we produced our 5th version of that this year. But I'm happy to say it's not just UK doing that now. We now have a global carbon roadmap for aviation through ATAG, Destination 2050, at a European level. And they all have got credible pathways to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. And they have varying degrees of the 4 pillars: operational efficiencies, technology, sustainable aviation fuels, or market-based measures. But what we have seen, increasing convergence around increasing role for sustainable aviation fuels, where now on the ATAG roadmap, we're looking at up to 70% by 2050. So we're all more comfortable we can get there by 2050. But as you rightly say, the challenge is the profile to get there. We are a hard-to-abate sector, and we call it the 15, 25, 60 problem. And what it basically, all those roadmaps have a similar profile. 15% we deliver in the 2020s, 25% in the 2030s, but 60% in the 2040s. Well, and that's not just because we're lazy and apathetic and stupid. It's just that's how long it takes to develop new technologies and new energy industries. But we accept that is just not going to be good enough. We have to work to bring that profile forward. And the real opportunity to do that is sustainable aviation fuels.
And how do we bring them forward?
So the good news is that previous commitments in earlier roadmaps looked at maybe between 2 and 5% by 2030. What you'll have seen in just in the last 6 months is commitments around 10%. So One World Alliance, which is 20% of global aviation, committed to 10%. We ourselves, IAG, in the US, they've actually committed to 15% by 2030. But importantly, the government, UK government, committed to 10% also by 2030. Now, what does that mean? It's 30 million tonnes globally. That's 300 plants. That's $250 billion of investment. That's 300,000 jobs. So we think if we can get to 10% by 2030, that gets us through that difficult phase of proving that this works. And then we think it's going to ramp up quite quickly. We think we can get 20% by 2035, and then 30% by 2040, and then greater than 50% by 2050. But it's this decade is going to be absolutely key to get those 300 plants built by 2030.
And I mean, because if I go with actually I have an electric car, but if I go with a car and I've got an option of 4 different petrol things to put in there, and I can choose how good the fuel is, but if I want to book an aeroplane, a ticket, I can't say, I'll choose those guys because they've got 80% sustainable aviation fuel rather than those ones, even if I'm willing to pay a premium. Is that feasible, or is that beyond?
My sense, for customer engagement purposes, there's the voluntary route is helpful, and you can do it. I mean, Lufthansa offer it, BA offer it. If you want to offset your emissions, you can do that today. Go onto the BA website and it'll show you how you can do that. But literally, that is not going to solve the problem. We're not going to do it through voluntary purposes. It has to be driven by policy and mandates. Yeah, and when and the absolute key to getting this investment, attracting this investment, we talk about the three elements of policy. You need a strong demand signal, so that can be driven by mandates. You need a price stability mechanism, so that's something like a contracts for difference. And then finally, you need some support with capital risk, so loan guarantees or grants and so on. So certainly, you'll see in the EU Fit for 55 package. There's a proposal there for a mandate, so that's great. The UK government, they put out a consultation in July for a mandate. So we're getting the first elements. The key, though, is that second element around a price stability mechanism. And that's where we're in detailed conversations with the government over the coming months, because we're just not going to get the investment until we get that piece. But I think I'm getting... the government announcement here in the UK 2 weeks ago around 10% by 2030 and 180 million grant funding gives us a strong sense that they're up for it.
Okay. And beyond fuel itself, I mean, what else can make a meaningful difference?
So the disruptive technologies, and it's really for short-haul travel, so commuter regional short-haul up to potentially 1,500 kilometres. You've got two technology options, hybrid electric, and then you've got hydrogen power, and that could be hydrogen fuel cell or hydrogen burn. Currently there are over 250 startups in this area. We've partnered with an amazing company called Zero Avia, and we spent a day down there a couple of weeks ago. They've got a fantastic facility, and I'm sure if anybody's interested, they're very welcome for visitors. But they've successfully tested a 6-seater with a hydrogen fuel cell, and now they're looking to have a test of a 19-seater in the next 6 months. So I think within the next 5 years, we will start to see regional and commuter aircraft on these disruptive technologies. And, what can they do out to 2050? I think probably 20 to 25% of our emissions can be addressed with those kind of technologies.
And in the short term, I mean, we saw recently the French government announcing, was it 2.5 hours, a journey that can be made in 2.5 hours by train. You weren't now going to be able to compete on that with plane. I mean, do we start actively supporting?
If it's and Air France are very happy to do that because they're not necessarily their best routes, and I think so it's kind of like, but the absolute key there is a seamless travel journey, and the beauty and what you have at Schiphol, Frankfurt, and Paris is the high-speed rail station goes directly to the hub airport. So you can have a seamless journey where you can travel on an international aircraft, you can connect onto a high-speed train, which you do. You can get a through ticket, your bag is taken through, and therefore it works. We just don't have that in this. We lobbied for it. We'd have loved to have high-speed 2 connect to Heathrow, and therefore, there's nothing more we would rather do than use some of the valuable slots at Heathrow for more international flights and reduce domestic flying. But it really depends on having that seamless travel experience.
Thanks, Jonathon. I'm going to move on now to Gianni Marostica, the MD of Global Business Development for Travel at Google. Google, not obviously as traditionally a travel company as the gentleman and the lady that are with me as otherwise, but recently you've made some significant moves into the travel space. And with a company of your size and potential, how can you help us to move sustainable tourism away from being a nice to have towards being the default option?
Thank you for the question, Jeremy, and hello to all my fellow panelists and attendees. So with all these global initiatives, I find that in most cases, one of the major issues is education and awareness. In my current role, I have the opportunity to speak to many travelers and also to many companies in the travel sector. And it's really quite fascinating to me to see how many both individuals and also companies are willing to engage and are willing to contribute in some way, shape, or form, but they often don't know how or don't know where to begin. In some cases, as I think Daryl mentioned, they may feel that their footprint is too small to really have a huge impact. So, which, as we all know, nothing is too small when it comes to sustainability. It's really important because it all adds up in the end. So one of the things we've done is we've given ourselves a goal to help over 1 billion users make more sustainable choices in 2022. And we started some initiatives on this front. I trust many of you in the industry have seen. We recently launched greener flights and launched greener hotels in our products. We're surfacing more authoritative climate change content to our users. In our Maps product, I think you've seen, we've also started showing some eco-friendly routes that people can choose. Might take you a few minutes more to get to your destination, but at least you can help save the planet in that way. And then we also have our Nest products. These are home products that users can use to essentially reduce the impact of their electricity uses. So we started introducing these options within our products so that users can actually become familiar with what's available and also get a better understanding of all sustainable options that exist. With our partners, I find that our platform gives our partners the ability to essentially showcase their products and their services and help everyone understand what they are doing as airlines, as hoteliers, all different contributors to the travel ecosystem. They can all basically show what they're doing and display this and give users a chance to sort by different options and be able, those who are willing to, select more sustainable options. So we have it in our platform. We've introduced a bunch of data to allow users to get more familiar with sustainable choices and make those choices there where they desire to do so. And our partners also have the ability to introduce their content and show where they are making some huge gains in sustainable efforts. The other thing I also wanted to mention is we recently, I trust some of you have read this in the press, we recently joined the Travelist Coalition. This is a partnership of organizations within the travel ecosystem. And our objective is basically to share data and work together to help develop models that can be consistently used across the industry, understood by everyone, users, and also understood by suppliers and participants in the travel ecosystem, so that they can then figure out what they can do to sort of help advance the agenda. The objective there is to develop a framework and a model that can be shared across the entire industry so everyone can participate, everyone can contribute. And for those who perhaps feel they are too small to directly participate in terms of being involved in the process, they can certainly make use of the models over time once they are available and be able to contribute in that way. So lots of opportunity. And as I said, one of the core issues here is really advancing education and awareness, and we're absolutely committed to that.
What are you seeing in terms of, I mean, you're providing it, it's there for those that want it, but those that want it potentially are those who are looking for it. So it's the person who is looking for the sustainable choice is maybe now finding it easier to do so. And of course, maybe in education, as you said, and providing information will make that a larger pool of potential people looking for these things. But Google has the opportunity to make this for everyone. Where are we on the journey towards it truly being what Google makes default?
So from our perspective, we, in terms of the travel space specifically, as you know, we have our own Google-wide initiatives in multiple, both with respect to Google itself internally and also in multiple industries. In the travel industry, we started recently, essentially towards midway through to the tail end of last year. So we just recently launched these new features and functions. We're getting an inordinate amount of feedback by users, and not just users that are interested, but also users that are seeing these sort of green tags appear and asking questions about, well, what exactly does that mean? And is there any data that I can be informed about? And if I hover over the green tag, or if I look at the about page on a given, for instance, hotelier, will I be able to, you will be able to see all the different attributes that various, in the case of hoteliers, attributes that they've essentially introduced in their product in order to allow for more sustainable solutions. So I have to say, in the brief period of time that our features and functions have been out there, the uptake has been phenomenal. Really, we're all very pleased and very impressed. And as much I would have thought, similar to what you mentioned, that it would be specifically for those who are looking for those type of solutions, what we're seeing is actually, it's not just individuals that are very well versed in sustainability, but also users and individuals that want to learn more about it and want to understand, what the impact is. Many of them are clicking on those options. And so it just brings us all kinds of pleasure. And it sort of gives me, on an ending note, it sort of gives me continued faith in humanity and the fact that people do want to do what's right. And as long as we help educate them and provide the content and the data, then they will, in all likelihood, do what's right.
Thank you. I'm going to ask questions to all of you, but I will stay with you, Gianni, first of all. And as you said, people do want to do what's right. And at Tourism Declares, we've got 400 companies that want to do what's right. 300 companies and destinations signed the Glasgow Declaration, wanting to do what's right. And almost everyone turned around and said, how do I start? What do I do to measure? I need to know what I am, how I'm having effect, where I can have most impact. Each one of you, in different ways, has spent significant amount of time addressing measurement. So, Gianni, first of all, what can Google contribute towards enabling the travel industry to measure its climate emissions?
Thank you. So I just wanted to mention, from a measurement perspective, we, in 2018, introduced our Environmental Insights Explorer tool. Roughly 70%, I'll come back to travel in a minute, but roughly 70% of emissions are generated from urban areas. What this tool does is it uses data and also helps generate calculations on carbon emissions for cities and for use also by local governments and local entities. And some of the things we do is measure, for instance, building emissions. We measure transportation, help measure transportation emissions. We also have this product that measures the capability of generating solar energy through putting panels on a rooftop. We also do a bunch of analysis on air quality together with the various cities and governments. We also introduced this functionality from a tree canopy analysis that helps sort of figure out which parts of a city are more shaded, which ones are not. Should we be planting more trees? If a city wants to plant more trees, can we plant those, in a very specific area where we'll essentially see a greater contribution? So in 2020, we gave ourselves an objective of helping, 500 cities do this. And I also wanted to say that in the interim, in 2021, we've put some significant resources and efforts in democratizing the tool. It's now being pushed out to over 20,000 cities. And we've seen some amazing examples. In Glasgow specifically, the city of Glasgow is using the tool to essentially help their citizens and the governments measure their city emissions. In Mannheim, for instance, in Germany, we're actually helping the city track the building of, the progress of the building of cycling routes so that they could encourage their citizens to use or to adopt more eco-friendly transportation modes. We're doing something very similar in Austin, which is also quite interesting. Roughly 40% of their carbon footprint is transportation related. So our Environmental Insights tool, Explorer tool, is allowing them to measure their progress towards reducing the carbon footprint.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else of the three of you like to contribute on how we address this?
Yeah, no, for aviation, all roads for us lead to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. This is the international body, it's a specialized agency of the UN, and they regulate us. So interestingly, most people don't realize that COP, there's no formal negotiations on aviation at COP because that's all done at ICAO. And they have a General Assembly every 3 years, and the next one is in 11 months' time. So, and what we really need for agreement at that General Assembly is three things: commitment to a long-term target, net zero emissions by 2050, strengthening of our global carbon offsetting reduction scheme, and strengthening many elements of that, but particularly eligibility for greenhouse gas removal technology, because we want to move into that area. And then thirdly, ambition on sustainable aviation fuels to facilitate global supply. So those three things. So we ask everybody, talk to your governments. ICAO is 195 United Nations member states. We want all of them to support those three levels of ambition next year. And that's the biggest thing that is going to help us decarbonize aviation.
Thank you. Darryl, anything to add?
Yeah, Jeremy, just talking a little bit about the tools that are available now, and increasingly there's a raft of tools available to hoteliers, to tour operators and so forth through WTTC or Tourism Declares. And I just thought I'd mention about the tools that we've used at Intrepid. You know, we look at where emissions are coming from, and largely that's either from our offices. We've got 35 odd offices around the world, or obviously from actual trip operations, and that in turn is from transport, from hotels, from flights and so forth, and working through analysis on how you can reduce those emissions on existing tour itineraries, and there are real techniques to do that. So, you know, I think sometimes people think, oh, it's too hard, how do you do it? It's actually not that hard. You know, you've just got to actually turn your brain around to actually doing it and committing the organisation to do it, and it can happen.
Yes, if I may, I think what has been very important for us, and coming back to what can we give back, is the measurement, right, and the use of science. We have people with doctorates in ecology using nature-based solutions and mangroves in the resorts. We have restoration projects within the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean, proving that restoration is feasible in a tourism accommodation provider. And we're determined to use that measurement and use that science. But I think one thing that is also important to remember is that Iberostar, with its medium size, it's always been characterized by the customer experience and quality. And I think what we're trying to prove as well is that, of course, we're in this race net to zero, but we should not forget that this is also something to prove that it will not go against the enrichment of tourism, the enrichment of the indulgement and the experience that the tourist will have when it is traveling. And I think this is one of the main things as well that Iberostar is determined to bring to the table, to prove that tourism that is responsible, that wants to leave a legacy, can also still have the same quest towards enriching experience and having the same level of quality.
Well, thank you. I like that you said there that wants to be responsible and wants to leave a legacy. I tried not to read things out, but I will forget it if I don't read it out. So I'm going to say, inside of the Glasgow Declaration, it says that a just and inclusive transformation of tourism must prioritise the needs and voices of the underrepresented and vulnerable groups, such as women, indigenous peoples, and people living in small island developing states. We're business leaders. How, though, do we as business leaders, so I'm not a business leader, you're business leaders, how do you ensure that the voices of those who don't get to sit on stage and make decisions and write declarations are absolutely central to what we do as an industry that relies on these people and the places they live?
I think for us as a tour operator, where the majority of our operations are actually occurring in developing countries, it's really kind of obvious, and in many respects, that's why we started on a sustainability journey 30 years ago, because we're working with relatively fragile communities in remote places on issues, be it educational, health, or indeed climate change. So for us, it became really obvious that, you know, we were the kind of the front end of the funnel, if you like, and we had to do the heavy lifting with them in partnership with local community to ensure their future. So we just see it as a responsible part of our supply chain management.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we have at IAG over 110 million, pre-COVID, 110 million customers a year. And, you know, one of the things that we need to be much better at is engaging with those customers to say, what is it you expect from the airline industry? And and we have mechanisms to do that, and we're going to be doing a lot more on that, not least on our flights. You know, we've got you for a few hours. Why don't we use that? The other thing I would say to everybody is, you know, today there is very limited supply of sustainable aviation fuels, but literally the next 2 to 3 years that are going to ramp up so quite quickly. We're all users of aviation. Talk to your airlines. If they're not using sustainable aviation fuels, ask them why not, because it is starting to become available. So I think we all have a role to play there.
Okay.
I think it comes back a little bit to what you were mentioning before on how we incorporate, from Iberostar's perspective, the supply chain and those that are smaller suppliers, smaller players. On the big picture, it's just being very open and transparent in what you're trying to accomplish, proving that the measurement is key for levels of engagement, for measuring success, for measuring that you're in the right path, and being very open in the dialogue. My sister and I are now 4th generation of a family business. We're young women, we're in our mid-40s, and trying to pursue that also very open culture. And I think that's what has to permeate, right? Be very open, be corporate, and be measurable and very transparent in what you're doing for others to follow as much as possible.
Okay, Gianni. We've only got, just so you know, we've got 3.5 minutes left, so I'd like to ask a sort of quick question to everyone afterwards. So, Gianni, if you could feel free to speak for a couple of minutes, but nothing more.
I'll be very, very quick. Through the democratization of our tools and data, we've essentially made it available to all kinds of users all over the world, and with a special focus on underrepresented users. We've also started several initiatives to help underrepresented businesses. And so I'd like to report that all of that is going very well. So thank you.
The roadmaps end with a call to action, and it's a really powerful call to action, and I was incredibly impressed when I read it. But it's easy to think that it's taken so much work for us to get to now that we all need to stop and think, and we'll pick the ball up again in 2022 because it's just about to be Christmas time. And then before we know it, it'll be 7 months until COP27, and we'll be, another year down the line. What do we do next? Jonathon?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I characterise the last 3 or 4 years as a commitment phase for our industry. And I think we've now come to the end of that. We now are all aligned around net zero emissions 2050. We now have to focus on a delivery phase. And I think aviation, we have to clearly demonstrate that the next 10 years, we're going to start to bend that curve downwards. Yeah, and the option there is sustainable aviation fuels. So, and we've all, we can talk to our airlines, talk to your governments. If they don't have a sustainable aviation plan, they should have. And you'll see a big announcement tomorrow. World Economic Forum with UK government will be issuing a SAF Ambassadors Policy Toolkit. So, and I think that let's all get behind it, because I think that is the real thing that we can all do in the next 10 years to really start reducing emissions from aviation.
Okay. Dan, I'm going to come back to you and let you as WTTC have the last word. So, Gloria, from the accommodation sector, what should we do next?
I think from the accommodation sector, it is clear to have our race to zero. Scope 1 and 2, there are solutions out there. We should all embrace them. We should all be brave and continue implementing them. And we should not lose that momentum and also generating that collective effort. Because as I was saying at the beginning, one must not forget that Scope 3 is going to be one of the greatest challenges for accommodation as well. And we need to work at this together. And we need to work at this together, finding the energy, knowing what kind of legacy we want to leave for a responsible tourism model in the future.
Gianni, speaking for Google.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate my original point, and it really is all about education and awareness. And so anything we can do, both in terms of our individual actions, in terms of the tools that we publish and make available. The one thing I would love to see is these conversations going from these wonderful conferences, essentially all the way through to the dinner table, and having everybody at home discussing the subject of sustainability. And the only way and quickest way to do that is, again, to increase awareness and education. And so we are fully focused on that, and we're seeing some great progress based on tools we've introduced so far. And as I said, I'm really quite amazed and pleased to see how there is a huge willingness to engage once we help people figure out how to do that.
Beryl, last word on yourself.
Yeah, look, I think we're here in COP. COPs only happen every 4 years or 5 years in some cases. And so I think as in these closing days, it's really timely for all of us in the industry to think about where we are and where we're heading in terms of decarbonisation. And I think it is about the now. There's been a lot of talk for a long time about climate change and about what we need to do, blah, blah, blah. In the words of Greta Thunberg, blah, blah, blah. And in fact, I think the time for talk is over. And actually the time for action is now. And this plan shows what is required. So my advice would be, there's 2,000 senior leaders from the travel and tourism on this call. First thing to do is download a copy of this plan, have a read of it. Second thing to do, sign up to the Glasgow Declaration, commit to actual targets for your business, and then go to work. Just start making plans, doing what's necessary, decarbonise. Away we go.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for everything you said and for being transparent and for being honest and speaking in a sense of collaboration. Hopefully, we'll be together again at COP27 and we'll be looking at some significant progress. This is the end. There's going to be a short video after I closed it here. And other than that, thank you very much for listening to us. And there will be some drinks and nibbles at the back. So thank you, Jonathon. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Gianni. Thanks, everyone.
We are united for the planet.
We are united for the planet.
Mēs esam vienoti planētas labā.
We are united for the planet.
We are united for our planet.
Estamos unidos pelo planeta.
We are united for the planet.
We're united for the planet.
We are 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 united for the planet.
Estamos unidos pelo planeta.
We are united for the planet.
We are united for the planet.
เรามาร่วมกัน United ในตัวโลกนี้นะครับ
We are united for our planet and our oceans.
We are united for the planet.